Good evening and welcome to the November 13th, 2019 meeting of the East Lansing Planning Commission. Mr. Haywood, would you please call roll?
Chairperson Bowman.
Here, indeed.
Vice Chair Boyle.
Here.
Cahill.
Here.
Downs. Sullivan.
Here.
Watson. Williams.
Here.
Wolf. And Kusler. We have a quorum.
Thank you. And it moves us on to item 1B, the approval of the agenda. You all have an agenda either in front of you or was in your pack. I would entertain a motion to approve that agenda.
So moved.
Second.
That's been moved by Commissioner Cahill and seconded by Vice Chair Boyle. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? That motion passes. I'll note that Commissioner Watson has joined us just in time for the approval of the minutes. In your packets were a copy of the minutes of the October 23rd, 2019 meeting. I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Second.
That's been moved by Commissioner Cahill and seconded by Commissioner Sullivan. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? That motion carries as well. That moves us on to item 2A, the form-based code or committee reports, starting with the form-based code committee. The Avenue District or the Avenue Form Committee met on November 1st, and again, we all met in work session last Wednesday on the November 6th. The next scheduled meeting for the form-based code, the Avenue Form Committee, is scheduled for this Friday, November 15th at 11 o'clock, and then of course we all have a tentatively scheduled work session for next Wednesday, November 20th at 5:30. We'll continue working our way through what will hopefully be the last couple drafts of the ordinance, and well, you'll see it presumably next Wednesday in its most fresh form at that time. Any questions for either Commissioner Williams or myself? All right then. That'll move us on to staff reports.
Just a quick update on city council activity. So last night, the city council adopted ordinance 1468, which is ordinance to rezone the property at 710, 722, and 722.5 Grove Street to pave the way for a sorority at that location. They also approved the site plan and special use permit for the same development. That's all for my report.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Haywood? All right, then. Item 4, commissioner announcements. Seeing no one has anything to announce, move us on to item 5. This is the communications by citizens. This is a time in our meeting when we invite members of the public to come forward and make comment on any items that are or are not on our agenda. We have one, currently we have a public hearing on our agenda, but there's an announcement regarding that. But we do have 3 items of old business, and for which we will not take specific public comment at the time that those come up on the agenda. So if you have any comments on the special use permit for 341 Evergreen, the site plan and special use permit at 115 Albert Street, or the site plan and special use permit for 3225 West Road, I would invite you to come forward now. Or if you have other items that you would just like to bring to the commission's attention, now would be the time. Typically, we'll allow a slight relaxation of that rules if you're the applicant, but if you would prefer to say something now.
Happy to wait. I just wanted to let you know I'm here.
Thank you.
Glad to answer questions.
Thanks a lot.
When we get to that item. Thanks.
Any other members of the public? All right, so seeing that there's no oral arguments, we did receive one letter from the People's Church regarding the upcoming request for qualifications for the Evergreen properties that we've seen several times in the past year, and then some comments on Building C that is on our agenda a little bit later. I guess we can talk about that at that time. The letter had 2 topics. That being the case, we will move on to, we'll close the public hearings regarding communications from citizens and move on to our actual public hearing. 6A, this is a public hearing, will be held to consider a site plan application from WREL LLC for the properties at 3118 and 3126 West Road to allow for the construction of a 1-story, 16,700 square foot office building. Ms. Schmidt, thank you.
Yes, as you see on your memo, you will want to make a motion to postpone that public hearing until the applicant has an opportunity to revise their plans.
Sure.
And we've provided a motion for you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
We saw that, presumed that everybody had seen that as part of the packet, that the applicant has asked that their application be postponed. I'm having some technical difficulties here, but a motion to, along the lines of Ms. Schmidt has recommended would be in order. Vice Chair Boyle, thank you.
All right. I move that in the matter of a public hearing to consider a site plan application from WREL LLC for the properties at 3118 and 3126 West Road, that to allow for the construction of a 1-story, 16,700 square foot office building, that we move to postpone the hearing in order to afford the applicant time to modify their application per their request.
I'll put.
Second.
It's been moved by Vice Chair Boyle and seconded by Commissioner Sullivan. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor of postponing the application, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, that motion carries. Moves us on to our old business, the first being a site plan and special use permit. This is an application from 3401 Evergreen LLC to modify the approved site plan and special use permit for the properties at 100 West Grand River Avenue, 120, 140 West Grand River Avenue, and 341, 345 Evergreen, to add a 6th story to Building C at 64 feet tall with 99 residential units and 34 parking spaces. Ms. Schmidt.
Thank you. This application came before you 2 weeks ago for a public hearing, and at that time, the Planning Commission requested a couple items. One was the previous parking plan, and then also evaluation of the current parking required for this particular plan. In your packet, I've included the parking plan from 2018 with the associated map and the narrative. And basically, what that is showing that back in 2018, the plan with the proposed parking on site was requiring 582 parking spaces altogether, and that included permit parking and also hourly parking. To divide those parking spaces out to hourly and permit parking, it would require 331 hourly parking and 251 permit parking spaces. We have other anecdotal information and then some specific information from the hotel on site, the Marriott, that our actual hotel parking is calculated too high, that it's actually 50% less that they require at Marriott or utilize. So that could, if we use that example from one hotel that we have an example for, you can even reduce the hourly parking even less to 227 hourly parking spaces. And then when you go to the map, basically the analysis of hourly parking and where the peak parking was at certain times for hourly parking, and then what we have available for permit parking. At that time, we had 100 parking spaces available just throughout the system without moving any of the parking nests, which would allow less hourly parking but more permit parking. And then with adjusting the nests in Charles Street and Division Street, we had plenty of hourly parking to move the nest to allow for 200 additional parking. So that would be 300 additional permit parking. Of course, when we look at the numbers, it was 285 parking, or not 285, 251 permit parking spaces. Other than that, the one thing that has changed as far as development for those parking areas that we've discussed before is the hub. And talking with the parking division, they have not significantly increased their permit parking for those division parking passes, so they're not concerned that that has changed for this particular evaluation. So when we look at the analysis from this year, from 2019, there are 34 different parking spaces. And if we break it down similarly, it would be 231 hourly parking spaces and 285 permit parking. So it shows you that the 2018 parking plan is still relevant for this parking scenario. Also in your packet, we've included conditions of approval and a motion for your convenience. If you have any additional questions that I can answer for you, I'd be happy to do that.
Questions for Ms. Schmidt? Vice Chair Boyle, and then
There was a change in a big change in occupants. They didn't add that
Yes.
many units, but they added a lot of occupants.
Correct.
Does that mean that they added a lot of three-bedroom apartments?
There were beds within the bedroom. We actually count parking by bedrooms, not beds, and they had some units where they added extra beds. And that could be a family with extra children. It could be a unit where there were students with extra people. It could be either or. So I think with that, that's where you get the extra number of potential occupants.
Well,
when
were
you
there
look at
three-bedroom
beds.
units in Building
Yes.
C before?
Yes, there were.
Okay. Because it added, it almost doubled
It
the
added 90 some.
the people,
Oh,
and they,
Correct.
Yeah. And the parking hardly increased at all.
Correct. 34.
Yeah. If it increased at all. I don't know, maybe it didn't. It's probably the same as it was. Do we know, we have another moderate income housing in East Lansing. From that experience, do we know whether there's any difference between the parking needs of a moderate income family residents?
I don't know that we've ever done an analysis of those particular projects for parking, so I can't say that we do.
I mean, I have, there's just not much parking for these residences. And if they have to pay for parking, and we are trying to make it affordable for moderate income people, then that
Right.
increases the cost, the monthly cost, because they're paying for parking in our system. How much is a monthly permit, do you know?
I believe they're 90.
Thanks.
Commissioner Cahill?
On Albert Street, there are going to be a number of new restaurants coming in, and
Correct.
one we have tonight next to Black Cat Bistro. That said it needed 27 parking spaces and didn't have any and would be accommodated by city parking.
Right,
And that made me wonder, because we're getting a number of developments there. There are
right.
2 restaurants, there's the coffee shop, and probably more, I would
Right.
imagine. Is that all calculated into parking availability?
It is, and what we're assuming, especially once we get more residents in the downtown, what you're assuming that a lot of the restaurant and coffee shop patrons will be on foot because they're living down there too, they're working down there, and they'll be using the facilities. But we have 302 hourly parking spaces in the new city center development. So that will accommodate a lot of them. And 302 hourly parking spaces, and you consider them coming and going at different times of day, depending on what their uses are. It's really interesting to see the parking department's numbers and how they evaluate that, because they can actually almost over park certain ramps because of that hourly parking being so, different, coming and going at different times.
Commissioner Boyle brought up the fact that we're talking about income limited
Right.
housing in this project, and those are people who would have possibly difficulty paying for parking permits. What's the cost per month? Say someone would have to buy a parking spot.
I believe it's $90 a month.
Other questions from Ms. Schmidt? Okay, thank you. If you'd stick close. Mr. Pearson had sort of come up to the mic. I'd sort of invite him to come back if he had something to if he wanted to clarify or just add some additional information.
If I could add a few comments. David Pearson on behalf of Convexity Real Estate. Partly on the bed counts and why that gets confusing is, as we explained the last time, in designing the apartments, they were designed. We've learned a lot since the original plan, which included almost all studios, 1-bedrooms, and efficiencies, which doesn't work for affordable housing, frankly. Part of it is that there's only a 15% difference from market rate in the rents, whereas it's 40% when you look at the 2 and 3 bedrooms. The other thing is to provide more room. MSHDA guidelines require that when you have a second bedroom, that be larger so that you can fit 2 twin beds. So those are set up, and much of the additional bed count is attributable to the fact that you have 2 twin beds, with the supposition that if you actually have 2 people in there, you have 2 children. So in terms of driving the parking demand, it doesn't do a lot, and I think that's a large reason why it doesn't dramatically increase the need for parking. The experience, I guess, that we're finding in terms of Landmark and Hub is that they haven't used a great deal of the city's otherwise available permit parking. I think everybody assumed that the Hub would, and in fact, their parking in-house still is not fully subscribed, even though its cost is the same or slightly less than some of the city's permits. So I think what we're starting to see is there are frankly people who want to live downtown who don't have cars. Or if they do, they're going to leave them somewhere else. And it appears, at least anecdotally, they're not using the city's parking system for, I guess, what you would call parking storage, really. It's not truly parking where they need to get to it on a daily basis. That's been the experience with the Hub, where there's actually very little traffic in and out of their garage. The number of their residents who use them every day is not that great. So parking storage is becoming an increasing issue. The other thing that I would mention is obviously, and I think Tim Dempsey came a number of times when this project was approved last year in its original form, to emphasize the city has a lot of parking spaces that they need to be used, that the full-out use of the system is, even at peak, somewhere between 55 and 65%, depending on the day of the week. And you have a lot of parking, frankly, that's needed, that needs people to use it. And the city's paid for that, has the investment already there. The other, and I realize we've been predicting this for a long time, the DDA property is once again going to be back on the market, and built into every plan for the DDA property is parking on the west side of downtown. Because I think the issue that people are particularly concerned about, and certainly Commissioner Cahill had emphasized this a number of times, yeah, but it's over there, to do with the valet parking that the Graduate Hotel will be doing, and how much is actually needed. I'm glad to hear that the parking people have talked to the Marriott, because the Graduate kept saying it's not as high as you think. And we're tracking the Marriott parking, and it is in fact substantially less than any calculation that there would be. People's Church sent a letter. I guess they do need more parking because they don't have enough parking on their own site. I mean, really their issue is that they've always looked to the city streets and the city's lots, either for events or particularly on Sundays. They don't have enough parking to meet the ordinance, frankly, if you count it, or to meet their needs when they do have their Sunday services, or when they have events like weddings. The city took on that role years ago, and one of the things that we need from you, oddly, is approval to have parking as part of our structure. Not only do we have to show you we got enough parking, but we have to show you we need some in the building, because under the ordinance, I don't want to say they don't want the property owners competing, but certainly that's some sense of it. We don't have any privately owned public parking in downtown East Lansing. The city has long ago decided to take on that role, and I think, frankly, this was the project that kicked off the city's efforts to start to fill those. That was the time when they started putting up the signs as to how many open spaces are in each lot. When you go past them, there's a neon sign that tells you how many spaces there are. In terms of counting how many are going to be there, I think in our counts we've given you the maximum based on beds. And I think part of another thing that's been happening over the last year or so, particularly since the hub was approved, is although everybody's figuring out that you want to know how many people are in there, the city's ordinance has always looked at units and bedrooms per unit. And I think this, among others, is the first that you're seeing, which is actually counting the number of possible beds and therefore the number of possible people. So again, if we're looking for families, our assumption is, and the experience that Convexity has had in other places, is that this is sufficient on-site parking. If more is needed, it's there and available in the city system. $90 a month isn't cheap, but when added to the reduced rents that are going to be available under the MSHDA guidelines that will be used here, we think that it's still well within range of affordable if they do need to have that in addition to what's available on site. I think the one other, and it's a very small issue that I want to bring up in case it's thought there's something missing, the engineering review that you have in your packet is the same one from before. And it's from Nicole McPherson. It says, we don't have anything to review. And the reason there isn't anything to review is we had a report from Bob Shireman, the city engineer, who reviewed the plans, which at that time include all of the engineering plans for Building C. Those were reviewed. The letter has specific comments on aspects of the Building C engineering plans and comments saying that the final plans should reflect these comments. I don't see that in your packet. I'd be happy to provide you a copy, but I think it's clear that Mr. Shireman reviewed these and that in fact you do have full engineering plans for Building C, so that you're not in a position where you need to wait for that. With respect to the traffic, again, what we looked at was a comparison of the prior plan, the prior traffic impact study, and that this overall project is a reduction from the traffic impact study that went to and was approved by the Transportation Commission in 2018. So I think we've covered all the bases. I'm happy to answer other questions that you have. We would ask that you recommend this for approval to the City Council. In terms of schedule, we're looking forward, frankly, to breaking ground next spring with the expectation that because this is a smaller building than the ones that are going up right now, it's about a 12 or a 13-month construction schedule, so it's quicker, and the expectation is that this building would be ready for occupancy by April or May of the following year. So, glad to answer any questions you have.
Questions for Mr. Pearson? Oops, Commissioner Cahill.
Could you explain again the Shireman letter?
Let
I was
let me
confused
grab
by
it.
what I saw about the engineering,
Let me
and it was something I was going to ask about.
see if I have it here. It was in the packet in 2018, and Mr. Shireman had reviewed all of the engineering plans and made comments, and the reason I'm sure that he was looking at plans that included Building C is that he made comments specifically on the sheets, that there were 4 sheets in the engineering plans that covered the Abbott and the Graduate, and then there were 3 that addressed what's the area around Building C, the water and the sewer. And if you give me a minute, I'd be happy to give you a copy of that letter, but there are specific comments on those sheets.
Mr. Haywood.
Maybe I can help.
Okay.
Move us past this, but normally, even with an amendment to a site plan, we would still want to see those, and I think the fact is that they hadn't been approved yet, even though they might have been in the council packet that was approved. Those plans don't get final approval until after the engineering has received. They might have issued comments on them, but then those comments need to be incorporated, and they go back to them, and then they're approved. But I think we know that we're kind of past all that because the utilities in the area of Evergreen, Albert, and Valley Court are very likely to be different than maybe what they even proposed back then. And we are trying to work with, or we are working with the applicant to give them some final direction on what we are going to participate in, most likely. So it may very well be different, and it may very well be something that we have to push additional utilities to get done as part of that partnership. So we are working toward a similar goal, but probably a different ultimate design where we end up. That's the sewer extension of Evergreen and the extension of Albert. All of those things are being considered at the same time, and we're trying to finalize direction on that so we can all get that final design completed.
Okay.
I don't know if that.
Well, I guess my point is that the plans are in the same place that they were in terms of approval that they were when the site plan was approved for A, C, and D last time. So our thought is that they could follow the same course. We understand there's going to be a level of detail that has to be worked out with engineering, and we would assume that a condition of this approval would be that the final plans have to be as approved by engineering. And as you said, we're working with the city and trying to work through exactly what that needs to include, because the city doesn't want to leave all of this, frankly, on the if-come for the DDA property whenever that happens.
Trying to avoid doing something right on
Right.
the backside of this project. I want to try to do it all at the same time.
And not
that's-
have to dig it all up all
Yes,
over again.
correct.
Right.
Right. And I think what the engineer's comments were trying to clear up was that they just had, the plans that were previously approved have not been approved as they are stated in the package that was submitted. So there was just more of saying, well, we actually haven't approved them, and at the time, we didn't know we were headed toward trying to unify the project in terms of utilities all at once, so we don't do it again later, digging up the same places twice. So that's kind of the long and short of it, so.
Please, Commissioner Kale.
Would the applicant be participating in?
Yes, most likely.
What we're looking at is a possible brownfield that would cover the utility work. Building C alone can't support, for example, an extension of Albert Avenue. There's not enough value in the increment to do that. So what we've asked the city to consider is an amendment to the brownfield for buildings A and D, which currently have a brownfield that'll be paid in about 9 years, but they have substantially more tax increment value. The Building C property does have contamination, so it's an eligible property that could be added to the brownfield that currently covers buildings A and D. Doesn't have to be contiguous with it. It's independently eligible. So an amended brownfield plan could add Building C, and then depending upon what the city wants to do and how the financing is worked out, do much of that utility work and street work now so that you don't have utilities that you've got construction vehicles running over, possibly causing damage to, and get that done now.
And so here's the other decision that we have to make with the most recent Evergreen proposal, Park Place West. Evergreen was to be abandoned and Albert extended, which is the preferred option. So what we're trying to avoid is that now that has that proposal is no longer on the table, redoing the utilities on Evergreen and putting a street back and then tearing it up again and then doing the extension on Albert. So we don't want to take a street out, put it back for the utilities, and then take it out again for the the inevitable Albert extension. So that's what we're trying to avoid too, and that will solve a lot of, your construction will be mobilized. There's a lot of efficiencies built into doing all of that at once, and will avoid remobilizing again after a building's occupied. So we're trying, although you have upfront costs that are associated with that, the project cost goes up, but I think we are looking at trying to create some crafty ways of financing that so that we can minimize our costs up front, but also avoid, costly, duplication of efforts on the back end and disruption to tenants and other businesses and residents and things like that. So we're trying to weigh all of that, and it's kind of pushing us into the direction of doing it all at once.
And it's consistent with Convexity's plan, which is one of the reasons they want to do these changes now, is because they want Walsh and McKenzie, who are currently doing the work on A, and also the infrastructure in Albert Avenue and Evergreen, to be able to move into this project. Partly it's the same company, but frankly, they want to keep the same people. They think they've got a very good team from Walsh and from McKenzie who are working on it, and if they can keep them here and move them to the next project, they feel that's very efficient, and it would be efficient to the city. And I know brownfield plans don't come to the Planning Commission, but I appreciate your bringing that up because it's very much part of the thinking behind this and the timing for it.
Any other questions for Mr. Pearson? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Return that back to the commission then. I'll note that the engineering issues, since we typically don't read them all through, but those, the first three conditions on the draft motion addresses the issues that the city engineer either has or will likely raise, and particularly things having to do with sewer and water connections and grading and erosion control and such, is sort of things that tend to, we see them, but perhaps don't entirely affect what we're doing. But obviously the engineer is very concerned about that and is incorporated in those first three conditions.
Add one more.
Of course.
I only do this because we've got a small number here and we had a different small number last time.
Yes.
So I feel a need to at least say, and I realize it's repetitious for some of you, is that the point of this revision is to make what we think is a better affordable housing project. It's to bring in market rate and to have it in the same building, to avoid the stigma of a pure affordable housing product, which is something that MISHDA encourages. At the same time, looking at the units that were in what was approved for Building C, it didn't really work for affordable housing. It was one-bedroom units almost entirely. There were not even any, I think there may have been a very limited number of two-bedroom units. So much of what you're seeing is a multiplication of addition of space and addition of beds to make this a better place for families. The assumed occupancy was less than 1.5 per unit. What we're looking for is to match, frankly, what the community has, which is about 2.5 people in any household. This change would accommodate that, and we think make this a good long-term affordable housing project that's more than that, that it is a great place for market rate and affordable housing together right there on the park. So I just wanted to do that. How did we get here, at least in brief, to make clear why we're requesting the change.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you. A motion would be in order if we want to continue to discuss this.
I
Mr.
would
Cahill?
move that in the matter of the request from 341 Evergreen LLC for modified site plan and special use permit approval for the properties at 100 West Grand River Avenue, 120 to 140 West Grand River Avenue, and 341 to 345 Evergreen Avenue.
I'll ask her, okay. Sorry.
A development that is a 5-story residential building with 1 level of parking and proposes a mix of apartment types ranging from studios to 3-bed units. I move to recommend approval to the City Council.
There's a motion. Is there a second? It's been moved by Commissioner Cahill and seconded by Commissioner Williams. Is there discussion on that motion? Vice Chair Boyle?
It's subjected to the conditions that are set forth in the staff.
Oh, I'm sorry.
22.
Yes, that's a friendly amendment that I'll add.
Thank you. Commissioner Cahill? Get the first bite of the apple if you'd like.
I'm concerned about the parking in this whole area here. As I indicated when the project was initially approved, I didn't think there was enough parking with the hotel and the apartments. But that was approved, and I don't know how much worse this would make it. So I probably won't object to it.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? Vice Chair Boyle?
Well, I'm
Please.
also concerned about the parking. It seems to be a very limited amount of parking. And I wish I thought to ask a question about the other income qualified property in the city and their use of parking so that we'd have something to look at. One of my concerns is this is not going to be like the hub, which is, I'm assuming, mostly students who are going across the street to work and to study, don't have jobs, whereas the residents, primarily families probably, who are going to be going into Building C, aren't students and aren't just going to the Michigan State property to conduct their daily business and eat their meals and such other things. And very limited amount of parking here. And some of the available spaces in the city are quite a hike from this location, which hasn't been true with the other properties that we've approved that use city parking. So it's definitely a concern I have for this. I want the building built. I want certainly to have income qualified housing in the downtown, in East Lansing, period, and in downtown especially. But
Certainly.
I am concerned about the parking, this particular proposal.
Did I see a couple other hands, or Commissioner Williams, please?
Commissioner Cahill and now Vice Chair Boyle's cautions, concerns, reservations about parking availability, but I support the proposal. I think it brings some much-needed diversity to the mix of housing available downtown.
Commissioner Sullivan, please.
Yeah, I share some of those parking concerns as well, and I think it's something that we really have to be cognizant of as we continue to push westward our downtown boundary and any further development. As we're reading the tea leaves, there's one coming down the pike potentially on those Evergreen properties. And I do support this proposal because it's one component of a much larger proposal that we've discussed several times before, but I think we really have to look at it carefully moving forward.
Fair enough. I mean, I think it's been demonstrated, if I'm sorry, Commissioner Watson, did you have, that the intention in the B3 district is not to provide parking on site, and that the intention is to either, unless a case can be made, the intention is, of course, to provide for that parking in the municipal lots, and that the fact is that this is much further west than we would typically see, and as a result of that, they're not particularly conveniently located, but they are identified as places where parking that would be ultimately required for this building would be taken up. I don't remember the specific numbers, but Mr. Pearson had indicated that Mr. Dempsey's report suggested that the municipal lots are very rarely even close to being full, barely over half typically, and that there's space, it's just not on the doorstep as we typically would like to see. And that we do have to be mindful that as we continue to move further west, we need to provide, the city might need to look at the reality of providing municipal parking on the west side of Abbott and points further west. I had a couple of comments about the building that I thought that the first time we saw this, it was a bit nebulous because it, by definition, was a placeholder. But I do like the way that it looks architecturally speaking. I think it's great. Significant use of brick and some terrific detailing on it. As regards the special use permits, we've got potential unique housing opportunities, but a really great transition. Not only from the existing or under construction buildings along Grand River and the Oakwood neighborhood to the north, but this, I think, might even provide a buffer between this proposed project, between the neighborhoods, the Valley Court Park, and the as yet undefined properties, additional properties along Evergreen, and it might I'm slowly getting myself comfortable with the idea that perhaps something a little bit taller is permissive or permittable. This will provide us with a really good visual as to what that slow step up back as we move back toward Grand River will provide. And so it comes out of sequence, but it might actually help, if it gets to that point, maybe make it a little bit easier to sell a property that's perhaps slightly taller than we might generally like to see in order to make the numbers work out. So in that regard, I think that I think it's a good looking building, and I think it's one that we need, and very much in favor of seeing it moving forward. Any other discussion? All right, seeing none, we'll call for a vote. That's been moved by Commissioner Cahill and seconded by Commissioner Williams to recommend approval to City Council based on the, 22 conditions listed in the staff report. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? That motion passes. Then we'll move on to City Council. Thank you. And then I'll move us on to item 7B. This is a site plan and special use permit, an application from the Peabody Group for the property at 115 Albert Avenue to allow the establishment of a restaurant, including alcohol sales. Ms. Schmidt, welcome back. Certainly.
This was in front of you 2 weeks ago at a public hearing, and the applicant has revised the floor plan to show seating and occupancy for 108 persons total. There was also discussion about the location of the bike parking, and the applicant is going to be working with Heather Pope, development analyst, and they're going to be putting bike parking in the park so that it'll be more convenient to the restaurant. With that, I also have provided a motion in the back of your staff report with conditions for your convenience, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions from Ms. Schmidt? Commissioner Sullivan?
Yes.
What was occupancy changed by? Refresh my memory. Was it
From
was
the
reduced?
previous, they reduced it, they had it originally at, I think, 114?
You said it's down to 103.
It's, their overall occupancy is 108, and that includes employees and patrons.
Thanks.
The breakdown is, I think you might have seen it, but it's on the
Yes.
plan. It's really small, but they break it down by different,
Small table.
Yeah, there you go. Do a stretch.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
There you go.
Thank you.
Sure. Commissioner Cahill?
As I understand it, it's common ownership between Black Cat and
Correct.
this restaurant? And have they gotten permission from the Liquor Control Commission?
I believe they've already been working with the Liquor Control Commission, and they're here tonight, so they'll be able to positively answer that for you, but I believe they have.
To make sure
Yes,
they're in
yeah.
compliance. Because they'll definitely have to get permission to.
Yeah, they have their attorney on board, and he specializes in that, so I'm sure they're on top of that.
I don't know, if it's a concern, it was an
Trying to
interest of
find
mine,
out
exactly how that
Right,
works, if
very
they're not
good.
going to actually exchange liquid liquor, but somehow exchange the license. I presume somebody knows how to do that, certainly not me. Any other questions for Ms. Schmidt? I see the applicants here, if they'd like to come forward and make any further, I don't know that there are any questions, but if you wanted to add anything to the, well, speaking of which, maybe you can enlighten us how this is all done.
Thank you. Good evening. Michael Brown from the Carl and Edwards Brown Law Firm. And since a couple of questions came up about the liquor license, I thought I would step forward to address those. And then if you have other questions, either I will take them or the other people here who have more knowledge about the actual physical plan and operational plan in terms of the menu and so forth can answer those questions if you need to. But just to address the liquor license issue that was brought up, yes, both spaces within this building are going to be leased from the same company, E&G Connection LLC, which is the current owner and operator of the Black Cat Bistro. The Black Cat Bistro was approached by the owner of the building, its landlord, several months ago with the idea of expanding into this space once Mena's Joint went out of business. And they decided to go ahead and do that. And the nice thing for the Black Cat Bistro, or I should say the owner, E&G Connection, is that this building is laid out in such a way that there is the common vestibule up front, which you can see in the plans or on the screen. And because that common vestibule essentially unites the two sides, it allows us to have both sides of the building serviced by one liquor license. So when the Black Cat Bistro was initially obtained the license, in filing our application with Liquor Control, we had to give them a diagram that showed that the license was only going to be used on the one part of the building that is currently the Black Cat Bistro. So now what we will do, as soon as we get through the East Lansing approval process, because we want to make sure we take care of this first, is we will apply to the Liquor Control Commission for what's called an add space application, which means that because we are not using any additional licenses, we're simply going to add the other space on the other side of the building to the liquor license so that in effect the entire building is now licensed under that one license. And as I say, we're able to do that because of the vestibule providing access to essentially both sides or the entire building without having to go outside, which is the requirement that the Liquor Control Commission imposes for defining the licensed premises. In other words, you can't say something is part of your licensed premises if the only way to access it is through some outside corridor or something of that nature. So that's how it's somewhat fortuitous for us and really helps make this project economically viable, is the fact that we don't have to go out and spend another $50,000 or $60,000 to buy a second license to essentially expand the operation into this second concept that is going to be developed in this other space. And so that's sort of how things will work from the liquor licensing standpoint. It's all one license, all under one ownership, all with one landlord, all with one address. And for the most part, the general public, other than those who are watching this on TV perhaps, will think this is two separate businesses because they're obviously going to have two separate facades. They're going to have two separate menus. They're going to have two separate concepts. And so, unless you knew this was going on, you're going to think that it's two separate businesses. But it's not. It's all one business that just so happens to have two different types of food being served, two different types of menus and so forth. One chef, however, and he's here, so the same chef from the Black Cat Bistro is developing the menu for the new side. And it's a very unique menu. It's a very exciting menu. It's one that the owners and the chef are very excited about, and we think will be a nice addition to downtown East Lansing. So hopefully that covered everything that you wanted to hear from a liquor licensing standpoint, but if not, that's why we're here.
Questions for Mr. Brown? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. There you go. Okay, no, I was just, you're the one, you're the expert. Man. You and Mr. Brown probably
I
could
didn't know
talk,
Mr. Brown was here.
talk great depth about
I
this
would've-
subject.
I would have known they knew. But
Any questions for staff or for the applicant then? Okay, then a motion would be in order. Commissioner Cahill, please.
In the matter of the request from the Peabody Group for special use permit and site plan approval for the property at 115 Albert Avenue to allow the establishment of a restaurant, including alcohol sales, I move to recommend approval to the city council, subject to the conditions stated in the staff report.
Second.
Of which there are 22. It's been moved by Commissioner Cahill and seconded by Vice Chair Boyle. Any discussion on that motion? No? All right. Seeing no discussion, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? Thank you. That'll move us on to item 7C. This is a site plan and special use permit. A public hearing will be held to consider a site plan and special use permit application from 3225 West Road LLC to build two new buildings, a 4-story, 107-room hotel, and a 4,015 square foot medical marijuana provisioning center. Mr. Haywood?
Just recently this afternoon, as a matter of fact, we received a request from the applicant to postpone action on the item. They expressed to me over the phone that after they saw our reaction to their proposed site condominium to address the road frontage, they are requesting time to examine other options for addressing that particular issue. So at this time, they're requesting postponement. We didn't have a chance to prepare a motion. I'm not sure that a motion is necessary, but they just simply asked that no action be taken, that they would come back at a later time.
You don't want a motion?
You could.
Maybe we might just as well. We did for
just as well.
the first time this was on our agenda about an hour ago.
This be a motion to table or?
To postpone, sure. Yeah, they've
Motion
asked
postponed.
that things be postponed.
And when it would come back, it would be a public hearing, since it would be a new,
Well, it probably depends on what they propose. If it's the same thing, then we wouldn't renotice it. We would have already held the public hearing. If the proposal is radically different, then we could choose to notice for an additional public hearing. But if it's substantively the same proposal, we most likely wouldn't notice.
okay. In that case, I move to postpone this to a date to be set by the applicant, I guess, or requested by the applicant.
There's a motion to postpone this application. Is there a second? Second to Commissioner Watson. Any discussion on that motion? All those in favor of postponing this application to a date uncertain, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, that motion carries. That moves us on to new business. Item 8A, Parks and Recreation 5-year plan. I don't have any agenda language, but I see that Ms. Wilmers-Longpre is here, and if you'll like to come forward and read every one of the 300 pages into the record, because we don't want to get out of here before 11 o'clock tonight.
Yes, until we'd be here for the next week and a half. Hello, all. Thank you for the opportunity to visit with you tonight about the Park and Recreation Plan. What was transmitted to you is the draft 2020 Park, Recreation, Open Space, and Greenways Plan. What this is a 5-year document that the Parks and Recreation Department prepares. Sometimes on an annual basis we update it, but this particular one has not been updated for, I think, about 4 years. The plan provides a comprehensive view of the existing parks and recreation system, and then provides some goals and objectives and guidelines for moving forward over the 5-year period to ensure that the needs of the community for parks, recreation, open space, and greenways are met. The plan is also a requirement of the Department of Natural Resources in order to remain eligible for Natural Resources Trust Fund dollars. Over the years, the city has been very successful in securing some of those funds. We have a wonderful relationship with the Department of Natural Resources, and we've received literally millions of dollars to go towards parks and recreation improvements and amenities in the city. So this plan is required in order to be eligible for those. Within the plan, the sort of meat of it is an inventory of all of our park and recreation facilities. Then we look at the population within the city of East Lansing. We do some analysis of our park system against standards as well as other similar communities. We also do some pretty extensive public input to get feedback from the community to find out what they would like to see in parks and recreation programs and services over the course of the 5 years. We also develop a capital improvements program as part of this process, and that mirrors, or it is what you approve on an annual basis as well. So we ensure that those two documents are consistent. Let's see, I was trying to think if there's other things. A few things to mention, just because I think they're pretty neat in terms of information that you can find in here. In Chapter 2, we really beefed up the section this year on regional plans. And what we did is we tried to look at all of the different planning documents that are out there and look at how those interact with the 5-year plan. This is something that the Department of Natural Resources likes to see, but it also it makes good planning sense to do your best to at least make sure you're not grossly divergent from some of the other plans that are out there. So there's a summary of a lot of the different regional plans that exist and that might have impact in parks and recreation programs and services. The other thing that we have added this time is in the planning and public input section, which is in Chapter 4. The City of East Lansing participates in a national database for parks and recreation programs and services, in which let's see, I don't remember the number of agencies off the top of my head. Here it is. 1,075 unique park and recreation agencies across the nation contribute data into this database. And when we contribute, we also then are able to get information out as to how we compare to all of these similar agencies across the United States. And so we have been able to add that information into the plan for the first time. And so that's really kind of neat to see how we compare to other communities throughout the nation. Then, of course, we look at population in the city and population trends and how that influences parks and recreation as well. So the process at this point in time is I wanted to speak to you about the plan, get any initial feedback from you. The Park and Rec Advisory Commission will be holding a public hearing on the plan next week. And then we will be bringing the plan back to you and requesting that you support City Council adopting the plan and sending it on to the Department of Natural Resources. So I would like to come back to you in December to ask for that support. So if there is anything that is really concerning to you or something that you'd like to see adjusted in this plan, this would be the time to share that with me, or within the next few weeks as well. So it doesn't have to be this evening tonight.
Any immediate input? I've got a couple of questions and just really more terminology. I did read as much as I could and I skimmed a fair amount of it, but there are a couple of things that sort of stuck out to me. This is specifically on figure 3.1, but you needn't necessarily find that. There's a term that refers to unmarked on-street routes, presumably, or it has to do with bikes, and it's got some streets identified. You could ride your bike on any street. I'm curious if those are places where maybe how does something get designated as an unmarked on-street route?
That is from the non-motorized transportation plan. And part of the process with development of that document and identification of routes that we might encourage non-motorized transportation on is they looked at streets that are generally residential, slower miles per hour, less people, less use. So they looked at some of the data associated with vehicular traffic and identified routes that would be safer for non-motorized travel than other routes. So, it's going to be safer to go down Durand Street than it is to go down Collingwood.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's that sort of
Sure,
thing.
okay, thanks. And then the next figure, it actually has, I don't have questions about all the figures, but just these two having to do with bikes. There was another term called potential bike route, so those are presumably places that would ultimately be labeled and have bike route signs or sharrows or arrows or something like that. Those are that's the next place where the bike route would be expanded.
Yes,
not?
I believe so. And we are looking at, over the course of the next year or two, the city is going to be looking at updating their non-motorized transportation plan. And part of that process is going to involve some of those discussions. Because more and more now, one of the challenges we have with the Northern Tier Trail is making that connection basically through sort of Old East Lansing and down to MSU or to the River Trail. All of that area within there is so developed to identify bike routes through there. We're going to have to start using streets in some fashion. And so then we have to start looking at how do you sign those in a way that people can understand and can follow and can make progress through the city safely. And so I think we'll see a lot of that come out when we start looking at the non-motorized transportation plan.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? We really call you the applicant for our presenter here this evening.
Well, again, thank you for the opportunity to share this with you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or take any feedback back to the advisory commission too. So, thank you.
All right, then that'll move us on to item 8B, our agenda, or our meeting date, for 2020. I'm, again, having technical difficulties. I'll just turn to Mr. Haywood and ask him just as well. I don't need to read it. I saw it earlier. Thanks.
Yeah, this is just housekeeping we do toward the end of every year, as we've provided in our memorandum, the potential dates for 2020, and a simple motion to approve the Planning Commission meeting dates for 2020 would be in order. Unless there are issues or concerns with any of the particular dates, these are the recommended for 2020.
Should we discuss the November 11th?
That's what I was just going to look at.
Because it's Veterans Day.
Isn't Veterans Day always a Monday?
Well, the 11th is typically the day, but I think they would generally stretch the weekend, would they not?
Yeah.
Well, the question is what the federal holiday is, isn't it?
The actual holiday is the 11th.
Yeah.
So the asterisk is suggesting if you didn't want to hold the meeting that day, you would either reschedule it, potentially for the 18th, which is the following Wednesday, or the day after, on the 12th, or leave it on the 11th.
Okay. We don't decide
What are you doing next November 11th? Please.
It is recommended that we make a decision tonight if you can, because we're starting to publish a notice for meeting dates in January. So without having a solid schedule, it'd be difficult for us to complete those notices.
Is the city closed on that day?
We were this week on Monday, so we would likely be closed that day.
Okay.
I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I don't know for sure for me either, for the county. If it's the Monday or if it's the 11th.
It would be easy enough to kick it to the 18th, so it's at least a Wednesday.
And then since there's only one meeting that month anyway, maybe sort of moving the meeting to the middle of the month wouldn't be a bad idea.
Mhm.
I'm comfortable with that.
Would you like a motion to make that modification?
Thanksgiving's the 26th, the following Thursday.
If we need a motion, I would.
Please, Commissioner Cahill, you've been.
We changed the November 11th date to November 18th.
So accept the calendar I was presented with a change to
Yes.
and do it all in one.
Okay.
Second.
Thank you. There's been a motion by Commissioner Cahill, seconded by Commissioner Sullivan to modify the November meeting date to the 18th, but otherwise accept the schedule as presented. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? That motion carries. Brings us on to item 9, Commissioner concerns. This isn't a concern, but I saw that last time Commissioner Wolf had a concern about identifying the reason for special use permits, and I saw that was part of the report this time. I don't know if yes, and so I echo his periodic concern that I sort of have to think about why exactly the special use permit has been triggered, and so that was helpful.
That's a good suggestion.
Yep, absolutely was.
Take that feedback.
Any other concerns?
When do we meet again? Is it December?
30,
Okay.
by the 11th or so, could be.
Okay.
December 2020.
And it's one time in December?
That's right. It's the second Wednesday in
December
December.
18th.
Okay.
Was that right?
Okay.
Wait a minute.
That's the 3rd. Yeah, there you go.
What is the 18th? Why is that on there? Oh, that's a different meeting, sorry. The 11th.
That's right. We'll meet one time in December.
Thank you.
Do we have a new commissioner?
We do. He has been, his name is Jeff Kusler. He's been appointed by the council. When we interviewed him about 2 weeks ago, he had indicated he was going to be out of town this evening, and so we'll meet him in December 11th.
And I missed the update on the form-based code. Will we be meeting into December?
The committee's meeting this Friday at 11:30, and then we're having another work session next Wednesday at
Right, I saw that.
5:30. So
And then do you think we'll be trying in December some more?
I don't, excuse me, this is still just November. Yeah, I suspect we probably will have at least one more work session into December.
Okay.
But
And if I happen to be available,
I hope you will.
is it beneficial? Because
Oh,
I've
absolutely.
missed so many meetings.
No, I think that if you've been,
Okay.
if you've been at least keeping if you've been reading it, you're on your own and come up with questions, I think any
Okay.
input, absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks for asking.
All right, thank
Yep.
you.
And each meeting's been different topics.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Other concerns? Then a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
It's been moved by Commissioner Cahill. Commissioner Williams, I've been ignoring you all night. Would you? Thank you. Has been moved by Commissioner Cahill and seconded by Commissioner Williams. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? We are adjourned at 8:15.
Veterans Day does not,
Good work,
is
folks.
not a Monday holiday.
It doesn't shift.